Welcome to FOXSOUL's Black Report. This is the space where we bring you Black America's headline news, views, and opinions. I'm Romeo.
Hey there, I'm Brooke.
I'm Demi.
Peace and love, I'm Nielle.
All right, coming up for you on today's report, U.S. Congresswoman Karen Bass responds to comments made by an attorney for William Roddy Bryant. He, along with Travis and Gregory McMichael, are charged with killing Ahmaud Arbery. And we'll tell you what the governor of Wisconsin just did ahead of a verdict in Kyle Rittenhouse's trial.
We will tell you what state has the highest gas prices in the country. Also, civil rights attorney Ben Crump, you know who he is. He's representing over 200 people in the Astroworld lawsuit. Also, we talk athletes that amplify Black excellence.
We have that and so much more because it's our voice and it's our truth. So let's get to it.
Hey there, soulmates, good evening. U.S. Congresswoman Karen Bass has been closely following the trial in Georgia where Travis and Gregory McMichael, along with their neighbor, William Roddy Bryant, are charged in Ahmaud Arbery's death. The Congresswoman had a lot to say about comments made by Bryant's lawyer, calling the behavior, quote, despicable. She's talking about this.
Obviously, there's only so many pastors they can have. And if their pastor's Al Sharpton right now, that's fine. But then that's it. We don't want any more Black pastors coming in here or other Jesse Jackson, whoever was in here earlier this week, sitting with the victim's family, trying to influence a jury in this case.
Okay, so just for the record, Al Sharpton was in the courtroom during that speech there. Jesse Jackson was in the courtroom today. I'll get to that in a second. But on those comments, the Congresswoman says she's very concerned about the outcome of the trial. She also says she's concerned about what's happening in Wisconsin. We're going to talk more about this later in the show, but of course, Wisconsin is where Kyle Rittenhouse stands trial. He, being the teenager charged with killing 2 men and wounding another at a protest in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in the aftermath of a white police officer shooting Jacob Blake, a Black man. So those comments were made last week. He said Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton was actually the pastor in the room. We talked about this a little bit on the show Friday, you and I, Romeo. So today, I want to update you on what happened today. Today, Jesse Jackson was in the courtroom, and initially, that lawyer had asked the judge to do something about Black pastors being in the courtroom. The judge declined. The lawyer brings it up again. Same lawyer, similar issue, different person. He got the name right today, but I just want to talk to you a little bit about what he said. You know, he said, I don't know who Mr. Reverend Jackson is pastoring here. He said his worry is that Jesse Jackson's presence, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, his presence could have an impact on the jury, an impact on the proceedings. He says, I guess the next question is which pastor is next? Is Raphael Warnock going to be the next person appearing this afternoon? We don't know. He said there is no reason for these prominent icons in the civil rights movement to be here. Again, the judge denied his request in this, but essentially he has an issue with Black pastors being in the courtroom. And it's interesting because he made some comments, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially saying that the galley is not supposed to be like courtside at an NBA game. Yeah. And he did call them civil rights icons. And so the reason that they're there is because the whole point of this trial is the question of whether this is a civil rights issue or not. And
exactly.
So as civil rights activists, the most prominent ones would be interested in this because it's their work.
He should get ready. He should get ready because there is pastors from across the nation, Black pastors, headed to Georgia this Wednesday. So he should be very prepared. And I actually watched the court proceedings this morning. And I became highly offended. I kind of thought about how those 3 white men judged Ahmaud Arbery in that community, and his posture, his demeanor was the same. This entitlement that these white people have, that they are the judge, jury, and the decider of what Black people can and cannot do. And that was the aura that he gave to the court. And I really respect the judge because his facial expressions this morning was just a look of embarrassment and a look of dismay. That he would actually sit there and say that. And the woman there with the blonde hair, her face was a little mortified as well. Look at her. Yeah. Because it's just unbelievable that he would say, who can be the pastor of a family, and that you can only have one, and they should be local. So they should just be ready for Wednesday.
Yeah, you know, when I saw that too, I'm glad you pointed out, Neil, about the lady, because I never noticed her because I was so busy looking at what he was saying. Just now we all saw, she was like, did he really just say that? The whole world was feeling that same way. On top of that, is he saying this to get the attention, maybe for the jury or feedback can get back saying, hey, maybe this is their plan overall? Instead of, is this part of the plan, him bringing this up over and over again? That's what I'm asking.
I mean, this is why when we have the discussion of should there be cameras in a courtroom with high profile trials like this, it's very important that there are cameras inside the courtroom, because you think about it, hey, what if we weren't able to see her face, to see that she was actually, it was cringeworthy to her as well, a white woman, hearing him utter those words. So that's a moment, Neil, and I'm actually really happy you brought it up. Also, and just my last little point that I want to add is that this has nothing to do about God. It's not about the fact that they're pastors and they're going to, give them some spell to make them all of a sudden think something. It's their influence. And so they don't want anyone with influence. If they were a rapper, if they were an activist, it doesn't matter. If a person with influence, white people, they are terrified of anybody being influenced right now to know the truth.
All right, let's head to our next story. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers announced on Friday that hundreds of Wisconsin National Guard troops have been activated ahead of the pending verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse murder trial, which is expected to possibly end this week. Now, according to the New York Post, around 500 troops will be on standby outside of Kenosha and will respond if requested by local enforcement in the case of civil unrest. Now, this case has taken a turn as well. This judge right here, Judge Schneider, he is a trip. Now, we know already that his ringtone is God Bless the USA, which was by Lee Greenwood's, a 1984 song, which is the anthem for Trump and all of his followers, the Trumpsters, the KKK, the QAnon, the alt-right, you name it, this is their song. So that's a sign right there. But what troubles me more so is that this man has been on the bench judging people of color. So let's just think about all the cases that he has presided over, and that he had the power to put years on black and brown people and thoughts in his perception of how he sees us. So I have no hope in this case. I'm just more concerned about all of the cases that he presided over as a judge and how many black and brown people are affected by his judgments.
I have no hope for this case at all. And I mean, that sounds sad, but I'm very terrified. I don't want to say I have no hope, but I'm very terrified of what the outcome could be. Also, when I read this, I was like, well, what is the National Guard for? Because you remember, after George Floyd's death, we had everyone around the world, there were riots going on. So I was wondering if this was kind to try to protect businesses. Like, what is this for? What do you think is going to happen here? I was trying to figure out, like, what is the reasoning? Do you think black people are going to be upset, which we are, or do you? What were they expecting? So I would love to know, like, what was the reasoning for this? Who do they think is going to cause the commotion?
I want to
go ahead.
Talk a little bit about the trial today, because I think the biggest news coming out of this today is the gun charge that the judge dismissed.
Right, yeah.
Really big, important story here. And so this is incredibly important, one, because a lot of legal analysts throughout this whole thing have been saying the only charge that they felt like was a sure thing for the prosecution was this charge that was dismissed by the judge today. And so I want to talk a little bit about the gun charge. And so essentially, there is a law in the state of Wisconsin that children cannot, it's illegal for children to have certain weapons.
Right.
So basically, there was a bit of a discrepancy that didn't become a discrepancy today. All three, the judge, the prosecution, the defense attorneys, all seem to agree that, at least the prosecution conceded, that the way the law is written, it essentially says the shorter barrel shotgun or rifle is illegal. And they all agree that Rittenhouse was carrying a gun with a longer barrel, which, because it's not technically illegal for certain kids to have like hunting weapons and things like that, that charge was dismissed. The judge dismissed that today. And so that happened in the middle of kind of a bit of a battle over jury instructions, even before closing arguments, which is also something that you don't often see, as often see happen kind of in the direction that things went today. But it was interesting to see everyone, the prosecution even kind of concede that maybe the way you read the law, it was legal for Rittenhouse to have that gun.
And, you know, like I said, at the end of the day, now that they're having this, they're about to wrap it up. People are a little on the edge, and that's why they're going to have those men there. Even when you ask why they're there, because knowing they're going to be there intensifies the situation, because you're like, what is the outcome? Does that mean the outcome is going to be bad? Either way, it's going to be bad for one side or the other. We all know how this outcome should be, and we're hoping that it is that. All right, Black police officer Keith Poole has filed a discrimination charge against an Ohio Police Department chief who was seen in a surveillance video putting a note saying Ku Klux Klan on the officer's jacket. Chief Anthony Campbell, who soon retired, had previously posted pictures of the officer and other employees on the Sheffield Lake Police Department's bulletin board that mocked the race, gender, and religion, according to the AP. The discrimination charge filed with the Ohio Civil Rights Commission is the first step toward filing a civil rights lawsuit, the attorney said. Last year, Poole became the first black officer in the department's history and still works there, said. All he could think of was, are you serious, when he found the note. So you think about this, and this reminds me when we talk about during the pandemic where a lot of black people and people of color were working from home, and they felt at ease by doing that because you don't have to encounter things like this at work. Now imagine him being the first black officer on the force. That's enough pressure within itself. You want to go do a job, you want to be focused, but to know the team, the people that's supposed to be on your side and support you, that they're doing things like this, and he's, a sergeant? Like, that's a problem. So you wonder what that does to him mentally on the job, and you wonder why most of the time the numbers are low when it comes to black men and women and people of color being on the police force, because they encounter things like this way too often.
Romeo, you know, I thought this was interesting because time and time again we tell a story here on our show about a police department in name a state, name a place, right? That says, oh, we're having a hard time. Police officers aren't going to want to come to work for qualified immunity. If qualified immunity stays, police officers aren't going to want. If it goes, police officers aren't going to want to go to work. But then this would make me not want to go to work. This is something that I think we should be focusing more on. Why would a police officer want to go to work and have to deal with conditions like this? This is more important than, you know, something that actually affects the black community. And they're worried. It just seems like they're worried about the wrong things. This is the topics that we should be focusing on. Why would I want to come and have to deal with something like this as a police officer when I'm here to protect and serve?
Let's talk about, the point I brought up before. How many victims that are black and brown did he plant evidence on? This man has been a police officer for over 20 years. He was the chief of police. And if he is doing that to the first black police officer on the unit, how many black and brown people did he victimize over the course of his career? And I think that's the bigger conversation that needs to begin to have. These police officers that are known racist, how they have used their career to lock black and brown people up. That's what really makes me upset about stories like this, is because I think about their career and what they have done to people of color over the longevity of it.
So it'll be interesting, I think, to follow what happens, and we will, of course, continue to follow this, but to follow what happens to the whistleblower in this case, because they're actually, USA Today is doing a series on police officer whistleblowers, and there's an important story that this kind of reminded me of, and I think the levels of, if you say there's a systemic problem, right, part of the system would be the process of someone telling on someone else in the system and how the system operates in that space, right? So in Illinois, actually, just this past week, an officer named, he was a 27-year vet, Javier Esqueda. He actually was booted from his police union and also is facing a charge and 20 years in prison because he released a video, a squad car video, of his fellow officers slapping and cursing out a black man who was dying of a drug overdose. And so that the officers that were actually doing the abuse in the video all got, they got in trouble, but none of them facing 20 years in prison. None of them released from their police union. And so I wonder, in these instances, and going back to this instance here, bringing it back around, you know, what was going through his mind, even knowing how this affects him, right? How this affects the people around him, how hard it was, or maybe easy, you know, depending on what his thought process was. But this officer here to become a whistleblower.
Yeah, that's true.
And it takes great bravery for whoever that person was to come forward. But a white Michigan police officer was fired after pointing a gun while off duty at a 19-year-old black man who was delivering newspapers in January. Chad Forge was appealing his May 5th termination from the DeWitt Police Department near Lansing, WLNS TV is reporting. He told investigators he thought the man was a suspect in recent break-ins when he followed him January 14th, asking him if he needed directions. Vorst followed the 19-year-old in his vehicle as the man drove from the neighborhood, and also calling 911 and told a dispatcher that there was a black male in the area and he needs to be checked. Vorst later told 911 that the man tried to back into his truck, and he said he's trying to ram me. I'm going to go. Shots fired if he does it again. That's all according to the 911 call. The man said that he drove to a gas station after Vorst pointed a gun at him, and he also told police he didn't know Vorst was a police officer. I think the most important part is that very last sentence, is that he didn't know it was a police officer. So all of this is happening to you. You're wondering what is going on. Not even to mention you're off duty also. So you're not on duty. Like, again, if you're on duty and you believe that there was really something happening, you want to protect the community, that is something that could be argued more in your favor. But you're first off duty. Second of all, this black man has no idea that you're even a police officer. So I'm sure he's terrified, clearly, why he's telling the story. And I mean, this is just an awful story. I couldn't even imagine. It's also why we are already afraid to be pulled over by police. For this to happen to someone and you don't even know that it's a police officer, terrifying.
We just covered a story like this a couple of weeks ago from Washington. Remember the police officer that thought that the paper boy, the black young man that was a paper boy, he thought that he shouldn't be in the neighborhood. And this all goes back to this conversation that we're having about white vigilantes. We see it in the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. We see it in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse. We see it in the case right here of this man taking upon himself to decide where black people should or should not be. This is a larger conversation that needs to be addressed, and a lot of people always put the blame, or not the blame, or the responsibility on black people, but I think white people need to start having conversations in their communities about how they're going to combat systemic racism and how they treat people of color, because this is ridiculous, and too many black and brown people in history in this country have been victimized by white people because they think they are entitled to be the judge, the decider, and the jury on how black people should act in this country.
You know, I just feel like you can't judge a book by its cover. So if you see a black man, whether he's in a hoodie or he's working in the middle of the night, you can't assume that he or she is out doing wrong in the situation. At the same time, this officer had a police car, he could have lit him up, right? Could have turned the lights on, that would have changed the whole game. Probably wouldn't be having this conversation. Look, he's been trained, he knows better. So in this situation, if you suspect something, you make a phone call, maybe you follow, but you don't go over the top like this, right? So what drives him to do that? That's a problem, because if he's gonna do that in this situation with what he's not sure about, what if the situation is a little bit more intensified? What would this same police officer, what would he have done? We don't know.
I mean, we've seen it, Romeo. We've seen this happen before, that it can turn fatal. And so it's just really scary to think of.
Let's move on to our next story. This is an interesting finding. Los Angeles authorities say 3 teenagers driven by racial hatred were behind hoax calls that brought major police responses to the home of a leading Black Lives Matter activist. So here's the story. The teenagers were told ages 13 to 16, connected over the Discord chat platform, and are suspects in more than 30 bomb threats and so-called swatting incidents across the country. So just in case you don't know, swatting is a type of phony emergency call made to attract police to a particular address, but it turns out they don't need to be there. They're accused of perpetrating 2 fake swatting calls, one this past September, another in August of 2021. This is all according to the Los Angeles Police Department at the home of Black Lives Matter LA co-founder Melina Abdullah. By the way, she is also a Cal State Los Angeles professor. And so kind of the obvious question here is, why would you want to? What is going on that would make you want to cause this sort of stress in someone's life, right? This sort of fear in someone's life? Because can you imagine you're sitting at home, you've got your son, your wife, you guys are sitting at home, and all of a sudden the SWAT team surrounds your house.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
I would be terrified, and I want to make sure my family is safe right away, right? But you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's happening in that situation.
Right, and it also puts the police officers in danger as well, because you've got two people, two different entities who have different information. You've got the person in the house, all their information is someone has popped up to my home and appears to be surrounding the place. Maybe I'm afraid they're going to come in. I don't know what's happening. I need to protect myself. You've got a SWAT team outside that says, I need to protect the people inside of the home because of the call that we just got. And that just seems to be a recipe for danger, right?
Yeah, I agree. And when you think about it, like we talked about a story before where they went and did a welfare check because the neighbor called the police, and we know the outcome, what happened to that young lady on that night. And that's something we don't want to happen again.
Yeah. I mean, I was not shocked at all that these were teenagers, because ever since we've been reporting on this story, something about it just didn't make sense. Like, we just, of course, couldn't even see her. She's a friend of the show. Couldn't even see something as crazy as what they were alleging happening. And so it just was so strange, but I was not shocked at all that these were teenagers. Also, it just made me think too, what kind of access do these teenagers have too, that they were able to make sure that the SWAT team came out? Of course, it makes us know, like, if there's potential danger, SWAT team is going to pull up. That was good to know. But also, I just wonder, like, what were they saying to make the SWAT team be able to come out with such vengeance like this?
Well, I talked to Melina right before the show started, and she's not buying any of this. Black Lives Matter released a statement. If you want to read it in its entirety on Instagram, it's Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. But she told me she's not buying any of it, and she wants an independent investigation into this. And she did tell me that she would come on the Black Report this week to discuss this case, as well as the Justice for Ahmaud Arbery trial and the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. So we look forward to having her on. Our next story goes to one-time Trump White House strategist Steve Bannon, who surrendered himself to law enforcement today, appearing for a hearing after he was indicted by a federal grand jury for defying a congressional subpoena. Now, Bannon is facing 2 charges of criminal contempt of Congress, one for failing to appear in an October 14th disposition before the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and another for refusal to provide documents to the panel. Now, the charges were filed by the Department of Justice on Friday, leaving Bannon facing a minimum of 30 days and a maximum of 1 year in jail, as well as a fine of $100 to $1,000 if convicted. Now, this is according to The Hill. The ringmaster. We just discussed so many stories about white vigilantes, white privilege, and there is the face of it all, the insider of it all. It starts from, his publication that he ran, to being a senior advisor in the White House, to all of the trauma that they caused under the Trump administration. And so I hope that now that he has turned himself in, that I don't believe that he'll do the right thing, but I hope that some fact-finding will come out of this as we continue to probe in the January 6th Capitol hearings.
When I think about that, Steve Bannon, another name that always keeps coming up is former Vice President Pence, because we understand what they were saying during the insurrection, how they were going for his neck, his throat, so to speak, right? So if his team does have emails, which I'm sure there has to be some paper trail before this went on January the 6th, are they willing to bring that forward? Or are they going to try not to, because Pence may want to run in 2024? Because, you know what I'm saying? He knows what he did to him, but he almost has to still sleep with the enemy, so to speak, if he wants to get in.
It's when I read this, I definitely thought about you, because you have been very open and honest about how you feel about Steve Bannon from the very beginning. So I was like, I know Nielle is jumping for joy probably on the inside, but also I'm hoping too that this is kind of a domino effect, that because we've just not seen any accountability for anyone. We've seen so many hundreds of people kind of just go and do this whole riot, walk away scot-free, it feels like. So seeing some real accountability held at the top level, it really makes me feel like, okay, cool, we're kind of getting somewhere. And now I want to see the crumbling. I want to see the foundation starting to shake up a little bit, because this is what we need to see. We need to see the government and the justice system, more importantly, work for us. We need to know that it actually works. So this was really good. And let me know that somebody's doing their job up there.